This is a hard passage this week. It seems like I'm saying that a lot, because there are some topics and things that you hit when you teach through a book of the Bible. You kind of hit some parts that you probably would have skipped if you weren't teaching through. And some of you are like, "Where are we now?" Right? No, 2 Peter, 2 Peter, chapter 2, starting in verse 3b. I kind of split it up. And that's throwing me off. And I wrote the wrong thing in my notes. But the verses in chapters we put in later when we're looking at the text. It's not like Peter's writing a letter and he's like chapter 2 and wrote a big 2 down and filled it out. But we put them in later to find our way. And so sometimes you'll have to split up a chapter because the thought is kind of not split up properly, and so sometimes we'll split up even a verse. And so we didn't really kind of deal with 3b, not 2b, or not to be. Anyway. It's going to be a long day. In fact, it's interesting because this is one of those sermons where we kind of have to talk about some Old Testament, some Hebrew Bible stories, and so it's going to look a little different than some of the other weeks do, so you don't know what you're going to get this week. There's times I look at my notes and I'm like, what are they going to get this week? Well, you're about to find out. Anyway, 2 Peter chapter 2, starting in 3b. But God condemned them long ago, and their destruction will not be delayed. And here we go. For God did not spare even the angels who sinned. He threw them into hell in the gloomy pits of darkness where they're being held until the day of judgment. And God did not spare the ancient world except for Noah and 7 others in his family. Noah warned the world of God's righteous judgment. So God protected Noah when he destroyed the world of ungodly people with a vast flood. Later, God condemned the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah and turned them into heaps of ashes. He made them an example of what will happen to ungodly people. But God also rescued Lot out of Sodom because he was a righteous man who was sick of the shameful immorality of the wicked people around him. Yes, Lot was a righteous man who was tormented in his soul by the wickedness he saw and heard day after day. So, here's 3 obviously difficult things. Number 1, angels who sinned. Did that kind of throw anyone else off? Like when they first started reading, they're like, what in the world is going on there? I'm seeing a lot of nods, so that's good. If you all had this, I could skip it. But I'm just messing with you because I knew we weren't going to skip it. But we have an adversary. And so to kind of back that up a little bit, with angels who've sinned, Genesis 3, you may remember Adam and Eve, story of the Bible. And they're in this perfect garden, and everything's good. And what does God say? He says, you can eat of any tree here, but this one. And like anything, there becomes temptation with that. Because if I told you, don't look to the right outside here, what do you all want to do? And what are some of you doing right now? Because I told you not to. There's this, you can have everything. It's kind of like if there was like one dessert on the table and you could have all the desserts you wanted, but not the cheesecake, what would you want? I would want the cheesecake, And so it says, Genesis 3, chapter 4, it says, Eve's like, oh, well, we can't eat, except for this tree because we'll die. And the serpent says, you won't die. God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil. And so what happens if you know the story? There's eating, there's sinning, and then everyone's naked, because anyway, they were naked before, they just didn't realize it. If you don't know the story, you can read it in Genesis 3. But then there's judgment then. And there's an interesting verse, Genesis 3:15 says, and I will cause hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, and you will strike his heel. And that's this promise that there still will be a Savior. And so we see there's an adversary. It's not physical snakes that we're talking about here, but the adversary, although some of us don't like snakes. Who likes snakes? Who has pet snakes? We're not going to your house. Instead of a guard dog, they should just have a picture of, I keep large pythons here. I like pythons. But a lot of us are scared of snakes. I find one in the yard. I always leave it because, especially black snakes, they're good. They eat the mice and everything. But, when you're underneath the house at 3 a.m. fixing a pipe and one shows up, you're alarmed. Most of us fear snakes. But we have an adversary who's been defeated. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus sends the disciples out. And they go, do their thing, and they're doing the Jesus stuff, because part of being a disciple of Jesus is to do the things he did. And they come back, and they're excited about all the good ministry stuff that happens. And Luke 10, Jesus said, yes, I told them, I saw Satan fall from heaven like lightning. Look, I've given you authority over all the power of the enemy, and you can walk among snakes and scorpions and crush them. Nothing will injure you. But don't rejoice because evil spirits obey you. Rejoice because your names are registered in heaven. And so I saw Satan fall like lightning. This is allusion to, Jesus saw that there was a rebellion at one point. And to bring in all the verses here would probably take hours and hours, and a lot of scriptures, a lot of time. But the theology of it, if you will, and you can, if you want to explore this more, we can talk, we can, text or something, and we can. But Satan was originally, an angel. Yeah, and so he's in charge. He's large and in charge, and he takes a big chunk, a third of the angels with him, and there's this rebellion. And so in this life, we like to talk about God, right? Because you're a church. It would be weird if you didn't like to talk about God at all. But we forget about the other side of this, which is there's this demonic realm. And it's funny sometimes because movies have all kinds of things that are, they take a little bit of biblical stuff and go in a really weird direction too. You remember the Denzel Washington movie? With Azazel, and it's actually, it comes out of a biblical thing, but I don't know that it's that biblical, but it's a freaky movie. You ought to watch it. No, there's probably bad stuff in it that I've forgotten. Every time I recommend a movie or something, it ends up being stuff I don't remember. Because kind of like you watch movies when you're a teenager, and you're telling your kids, this movie's awesome. And then you better preview it before you show it to them, because there's whole sections that you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot that was in there. Any? Okay, just 2 or 3 of us. The rest of you don't care about your children. But and so this alludes to Satan's fall and his demons. And demons show up a lot in the New Testament, right? One of my favorite stories about the demonic, which sounds funny when you say it that way, is Jesus with the Gerasene demoniac. He goes across the lake, he shows up, and it's there's this naked dude running around, full of a legion of demons, and he runs up to the disciples, and Jesus, he's screaming at Jesus. He has this dialogue. The demons are having this dialogue with Jesus. Jesus casts out the demons. They jump into some pigs, and that was the original swine flu, because they jump off the cliff. All the bad jokes are coming in now. And so there's this, this demonic force that wants to kill and destroy. But kind of like Satan's kind of on a leash. And so we have to deal with the forces of evil that are against us. And Paul reminds us, Ephesians 6, verse 12, says, for our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers and against authorities, against powers of this dark world, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. And so there is this spiritual stuff that we have to deal with. Now, there's a danger with a lot of things in the Bible. There's a danger in, never paying attention to this and not believing that there's spiritual forces, because you kind of get this wrong idea about life. The other danger is I have friends who are there's a demon under every rock. Every sin they have is, a demon. Well, no, there's also our will sometimes. The fact that you ate that dessert isn't a demon, it's just we like to eat. At times it can be sin, but it's, it's things we need to deal with. And so, bottom line is, no one escapes God's judgment, even demons. And so they're on a leash, I like to think of. They're not completely done yet, because they still have a little bit of rein in here. It's kind of like I have a dog, and when we have to put him out, to let him, because right now he still doesn't know his boundaries. Anyone have a dog that just likes to run? Ours, like my son raised his hand. Because the UPS guy comes and he's gone. It's like he was fine, he was right here, but fortunately he's not biting the UPS guy, but he's just like, he's a bullet, he's fast. And he's crazy. That's why his name is Loki. And so he's living in a good place because he's living with other crazy people. He definitely fits our family. And so Satan is on a leash, if you will. We have to tie him to a line if we're going to let him run around too long, because he kind of goes. And so Satan's not fully, in charge. The disciples doing stuff. Satan, they're reining him in. Demons are, submitting to him. But there is the demonic. Bottom line is, no one's going to escape God's judgment, even the spiritual beings. Now, Genesis 6, this is part 2, is the flood and Noah. Now, anyone ever heard of this guy named Noah? Do you have like the little tub toys when you were little? Or I'll be honest. One of the cool things about having kids, if you don't have kids, one of the cool things is the toys. Because I think most men, we're kind of like grown-up children. We like toys. I mean tools. I mean toys. And so, when the kids were little, I didn't mind helping with bath time, especially because there was like the little ark and they had these like cushy little animals and they all clicked in there. It was kind of fun, and that's why we get the kids Legos, because it's for them. Because every kid needs a Lego Battlestar Galactica, or I don't know, whatever. I never got the like really nice ones, but I did enjoy going to like Target and getting the Lego sets, and or we'd price match between Walmart and Target and or anyway. I love building Legos and stuff, but I love the Noah's Ark toy we had when we were kids. It was kind of fun, little giraffe, tall neck, and everything. And so we kind of make it into a kid's story. But if you ever hear the stories as a kid? We started kids church again today. It's great, it's fun. But you only teach sometimes certain levels of the stories to the kids. And so I remember as a kid, about the only thing I remembered was there was an ark and there was a flood, and I think there was animals, and there was a song apparently, 2x2 or something, I don't know. We get them on the boat. And so we kind of turn it into a kid's story, but it's really the story of the world went bad. And if you read Genesis, I recommend you read it after today, because we've got lots of Genesis stuff in here. But if you read Genesis, God creates the world good, Adam and Eve sin, but things kind of go downhill from there. They sort of spin out of control. People begin to sin a lot. Maybe you kind of feel like it's today, the world, it just seems like everything's going on. And so God decides he's going to, take care of it. There's going to be judgment. Noah builds an ark, and there's people who think it took 100 years. I don't know. Like there's some jumps in the text. It doesn't quite tell us, but he spent a lot of time building this ark. And then, presumably he's telling people, hey, there's just going to be this judgment. He gets everybody on the ark, gets all the animals on the ark. There's a flood. There's judgment. And you can read that. It says, this is the account of Noah and his family. Noah's a righteous man, the only blameless person living on the earth at the time, and he walked in close fellowship with God. So God saw the earth was corrupt and filled with violence. God observed all the crushed world, for everyone on the earth was corrupt. And God said, I've decided to destroy all living creatures, for they have filled the earth with violence. Yes, I will wipe them out all along with the earth. And so he builds a boat. The unrighteous is destroyed. The righteous are saved. And so the flood is a judgment, right? And bottom line is God judged the world, but he always saves the righteous. There's this righteous remnant. And so he doesn't destroy everybody, just, he's saving them. And so there's judgment. Now, Sodom and Gomorrah and Lot. Now, if you don't know who Lot is, does anyone know a lot about him? Sorry, I couldn't resist that one. If you want bad jokes, welcome. If you don't, you're getting them anyway. But there's a guy Genesis, there's a guy named Abraham. Father Abraham. And then, actually, which is funny because he only really had two, but eventually he... so there's Abraham, and we read a lot about Abraham, but he's got his nephew, Lot, hanging out with him. It's kind of a family thing. So Lot's kind of chilling with him. They've left where they're from. They go down, and Lot's hanging out with them. But, the land couldn't support both of them. It kind of gets too big. It's so, I think this is around Genesis 13 maybe. Land couldn't support them both. It says, so disputes broke out between the herdsmen of Abram. It was Abram at the time. He gets a name change. He becomes Abraham. That's another whole sermon for another time. But there's, so kind of disputes break out because, there's a lot of herds. Now, most of us probably don't have a lot of herds, right? No, we don't have any herds. We are in Wyoming, though. Like, if we go out of the town, there's all kinds of animals. We went to pick up something the other day. We're, driving there. There's, alpacas or llamas. We were debating which they were. I'm not sure. And there's, bison out on a farm here. There's still a bison there. Anyone seen them recently? There's all kinds of animals and stuff. But picture, if you're, traveling around and animals eat the stuff around them, if you have too many, what happens? You need more space. And so Abram and Lot, their herdsmen are kind of fighting with each other over the best place to bring the animals. And so they get together, and it says, finally Abram said to Lot, let's not allow this conflict come between us or our herdsmen. After all, we're close relatives. Hey, let's not let the family split over this. We're gonna split up to not fight. That's why most of us like separate bedrooms from our siblings, because some of you get along with your siblings, the rest of us don't. No. Now you're wondering, no, I get along fine. I'm going to be at my brother's house later today. But it says, the whole countryside is open to you. Take your choice of any section of land you want, and we'll separate. If you want the land to the left, I'll take to the right. If you prefer the land to the right, I'll go to the left. It says, Lot took a long look at the fertile plains of the Jordan Valley in the direction of Zoar. The whole area was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord or the beautiful land of Egypt. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, obviously, because that's going to come into play in a minute. So Lot chose for himself the whole Jordan Valley in the east, to the east of them. He went there with his flocks and servants and parted company with his uncle, and Abraham goes to Canaan. Now, Abraham gives Lot first dibs. And so Lot looks out and he sees hey, this is good place. So, Uncle, you can go there. I'm going here. Now, it turns out not to be a good choice, right? Because he takes all his flocks and herds. He goes over and he's living by Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, if you don't know anything else about the Bible, you've probably, maybe heard allusions to Sodom and Gomorrah as not a good place to live. I lived in Los Angeles. I used to make jokes. It was just outside of LA and Gomorrah. Some of you get it, some of you don't. Anyway, they're living there, and here's some things that aren't taught in the Sunday school class. When we get to the next story, God says, "Hey, we're gonna destroy this." Abraham sort of barters. There's this episode. You can read it, Genesis 18. Because he said, "I'm going to destroy this thing." And he's like, "Hey, Lord, what if you find 50?" And Lord's like, "Okay, if I find 50 righteous people over there, we'll let it go." And Lot's over there, so Abraham's kind of thinking about his nephew, I think. And then he's like, "Well, what if you find 45?" And they're kind of working it down. You can read it like an auctioneer. Hey, Lord, 50, 45. Reverse auctioneering it there. Get down to 10, which he probably should have kept going 1, because as you'll see, and if you read the story, the angels show up. In those days, Lot's sitting at the gate, and people come, and there was hospitality, and you were supposed to be hospitable. They come, and they're supposed to be hospitable to them, and Lot brings them in, feeds them. They show up in the middle of the night, and here's the part that you're not going to read, and I'm going to kind of move quickly over it, is they want them to they want the gentleman to come out for the night to rape them. And so the crazy story is and then he's like, "Oh, well, send my daughters. How about that?" And you're looking at this whole story and you're like, man, Lot is kind of messed up. And again, there's some stories in the Bible that are a little messed up. Not because God wants these things to happen, but there's a lot of stories in the Bible of just how things have happened. And in America, we kind of are there's some international conflicts and things that are going on that sometimes we don't even see the level of sin and stuff that's going on around the world. And there's lots of crazy stuff. So if you read this story, and it's funny, if Peter hadn't written that Lot was a righteous man, I would have had my doubts. And so the angels they save save Lot. He has to flee the city, and it ends up just fleeing with his daughters and his wife. Presumably all his possessions are destroyed. The Lot, his they said don't look back, and his wife looks back, and turns into a pillar of salt. And sometimes they put that verse on the back by the clock in churches, because don't turn back. Because you're wondering how long the sermon is, and anyway, jokes. But there's all this crazy stuff, but Peter, says that Lot was distressed by the sin. Now, it's kind of interesting because I don't really get that from the story when you look at Lot's behavior, but maybe there's possibly something. I'll be honest with you, when there's some scriptures I don't understand fully yet, and this story is one of them with Lot. I just got questions when I read it. I don't understand what he's doing. Maybe some of you have figured it out after years and years of study. I'll let you up later to explain it all. But Peter says he was righteous and he was distressed. Now it's interesting because are we distressed by the sin around us? A little side sermon. Because we live in a culture that's full of junk, right? That's full of stuff around us. It's too easy to become accommodating to the lawlessness around us and entertained by it because we like it in our movies. And it reminds me of how do you cook a frog? You've probably all heard this. Like you don't take a pot of boiling water and throw a frog in it, because what would the frog do? Yeah, and then they'd call PETA immediately. They'd be there on you. But you put a frog, they say, in water, and I've never tried this, and you just kind of heat it up gradually, and you can cook the frog. I don't know. I don't eat a lot of frog. Anyone eat frog? Go gigging for frogs? No, I think I have eaten frog. I'll eat anything, as you can tell. Because if you kind of do it gradually, you don't sense it. And so, kind of like Lot, he may have been a preacher of righteousness. He may be righteous. I don't know, but that's what Peter says. But there's some struggles we have when we're around our culture, and it's easy to kind of get swept into things. So bottom line, though, God judged the world, saved the righteous. And there were likely very other cities that were really bad. It's not like Sodom and Gomorrah were it. There's lots of other places, but God judged in order to demonstrate his righteousness. Now, 2 Peter 2:9. Some of you are glad we're getting down there a little bit. It says, so you see, the Lord knows how to rescue godly people from their trials, even while keeping the wicked under punishment until the day of final judgment. Now, many of us, if we're honest, not you, but I mean the rest of people listening online, we struggle with the idea of a loving God sending someone to hell, right? Like most people are not like, yay! It's a struggle, but to be loving means there's judgment. It's not loving to never have judgment. Now, let's think of a scenario. Some of you are old enough to remember, like Osama bin Laden. Okay. You remember his father. Okay. But I mean, yeah, it's funny because sometimes like things like 9/11. It's like part of the history books now. Like my kids read about it in history, and I'm explaining what the world was like pre-9/11, and they're just like, "What?" To them, it's ancient history. So I mean, we were mentioning I was driving around with Justin this week for something. We were talking about the Berlin Wall. Does anybody remember the Berlin Wall? My kids would have no idea what it is. I have like a little chunk of it. It's supposed to be of it. I don't know. It's got a certificate of authenticity. But, it's kind of cool. Some of you are laughing because you're like, I don't even know what the Berlin Wall is. Because it probably fell before you were born. I'm old. But, if Osama bin Laden, when they caught him, they just said, hey, we've all sinned. We've all done some bad stuff, man. Just don't do it anymore. Would we be happy? No. Probably most people wouldn't be because we have this sense of, when someone's done wrong, there should be justice. I think all of us have this sense of justice and planet is. Now, if you watch the original Star Wars, that we worked it in, and Luke is like, flying along, and, there's a little exhaust port on, the Death Star, and it's about the size of a Womp Rat, and they shoot the little torpedo in there and blow the whole thing up. We all kind of, if you don't know anything about the movie, if you haven't seen it by now, spoiler alert, you're just never going to see it. You should have seen it by now. But, we're kind of excited, right? Because the evil empire falls. And I think there's this part of us who wants to see justice, but when there's justice, that means there's judgment. Now, many of us struggle in life, I think, because we see the unrighteous prosper. Anyone? It seems like the people who do wrong get ahead. It seems like those who do right sometimes don't get ahead. Anyone? No one else struggles with that. Okay, two other people? Do I hear three? Do I hear three? Do I hear three? 3 and 4, then I do 5. Okay. Psalm 73, a psalm of Asaph. So I'm picturing Asaph right in this. He says, "Truly God is good to Israel, to those whose hearts are pure. But as for me, I've almost lost my footing. My feet were slipping and I was almost gone. For I envied the proud when I saw them prosper despite their wickedness." Like, this isn't like a new thing. They get away with stuff now. This has been a problem. Here's the guy writing the psalm going, hey, I struggled with this. "For they seem to live such painless lives. Their bodies are healthy and strong. They don't have troubles like other people. They're not plagued with problems like everyone else." Anyone ever feel, they seem like they're getting along fine. "They wear pride like a jeweled necklace and clothe themselves with cruelty. These fat cats," I started to think I was reading the Message when I was reading this today. I was like, these fat cats have everything their hearts could ever wish for. "They scoff and speak only evil. In their pride, they seek to crush others. They boast against the very heavens, and their words strut throughout the earth." People are godless. They mock God, and they seem to be doing well. Okay. And the people are dismayed and confused, drinking all their words. And so people are like, "Oh, yeah, I guess, okay." How does God know, they ask? Does the Most High even know what's happening? "Look at these wicked people, enjoying a life of ease while their riches multiply, making it, with Bitcoin and Dogcoin. And did I keep my heart pure for nothing? Did I keep myself innocent for no reason?" And so there's this despair of, hey, am I doing the God thing in vain? I'm trying to live the godly life. I'm saying no to things that I want to do because I know it's a godly thing. I'm saying yes to some things I don't want to do because, I know it's the way to live. "I get nothing but trouble all day long. Every morning brings me pain." Now, those who are older and have lifted too much, we get this. Every morning brings me pain. I wake up with a sprained ankle more times. And I think I sprained it in the 80s. Not in my 80s, but in the 1980s. It was this whole other decade. "If I had spoken this way to others, I would have been a traitor to your people. So I tried to understand why it is the wicked prosper, what a difficult task it is. Then I went into your sanctuary, O God, and I finally understood the destiny of the wicked. Truly, you put them on a slippery path and send them sliding over a cliff to destruction." I picture that just in an instant they're destroyed, completely swept away by terrors. "When you arise, O Lord, you will laugh at their silly ideas as a person laughs at dreams in the morning." You ever have a crazy dream and you wake up and you're like, "I had the weirdest dream." It's kind of like silly nonsense. It's like and scientists say it's your brain trying to put things together and everything. I don't know. But that's kind of, eventually there will be a judgment. And if there was no judgment, life would be unjust. Because the wicked prosper, and sometimes the good don't. We struggle in this life. Now it's hard when we see the unrighteous do well, but we have to trust that God's got this. God's got you. And so our job is not to make sure they get it. And the thing is, we all misjudge ourselves too, right? Because we overestimate our strength and our unrighteousness. I found this thing this morning. It was sort of accidental, but I laughed. 6% of Americans, anyway. Well, I'll get to what the 6% think they could do. So I have this chart, and it was a survey of Americans. Which of the following animals, if any, do you think you could beat in a fight if you were unarmed. A rat. 72% of Americans are like, I got this. I got a rat. They're small. I could step on them. Which it's funny. It's interesting that, 28% it's like, nah, I'm just running. A house cat, 69. A goose, 61. Man, geese are nasty. Like, they're pretty in the air. They're not so pretty when, they think you've wronged them at the Target parking lot. I'm just saying. Medium-sized dog, 49. An eagle, we're getting lower, 30%. They're bigger than they look, though. Anyway, large dog, we're down to 23%. Chimpanzee, 17. King cobra. 15% of Americans think they could beat a king cobra in a fight unarmed. 15% of Americans will not reproduce if faced by a king cobra. A kangaroo, 14%. They kind of do that. We call it the Joey kick. They jump up and then kick you. Anyway. A wolf, 12. Crocodile, 9. Gorilla, 8. Lion, 8. Eight percent of Americans think they can beat a lion in an unarmed fight. If that doesn't explain our country in a nutshell, it gets worse. 6% think they can beat a grizzly bear. I'm more fearful of a grizzly bear than a lion. I mean, have you seen The Revenant? No, but I think most of us, we sort of overestimate, our strength. We overestimate what watching Kung Fu theater as a kid has done for our skill levels. Some of you remember those days. We misjudge ourselves. And most of us believe there's a line between what we can get away with and what God will judge. And I suspect most of us draw that line in our favor. Because, they're evil, but, here's the line. As long as we don't go over this one. As long as we don't go over this one. And we overestimate our strength in our own righteousness, which is why we need help when we're judged by God's standards. That's why we need a Savior. But in this world, there's going to be this mix of good and bad, and we wait for God's judgment. Matthew chapter 13 says, Jesus tells a story. He goes, here's another story. I like it when he says that. Just here's another story Jesus told. The kingdom of heaven is like a farmer who planted good seed in his field. But that night, as the workers slept, his enemy came and planted weeds among the wheat, then slipped away. It's kind of, ninja seed planters. It's not a big issue with most of us. Although some of you, like when you garden, you're like, did someone come and plant these weeds? Because you're like, how did they all get here? Your crop began to grow and plant grain, the weeds grew. And the farmer's workers went to him and said, Sir, the field you planted with a good seed is full of weeds. Where'd they come from? An enemy has done this, the farmer exclaimed. Should we pull out the weeds? They asked. No, you'll uproot the wheat if you do. Let both grow together until the harvest. Then I will tell the harvesters to sort out the weeds and tie them into bundles and burn them and put the wheat into the barn. And so, it's like when I have to do the landscaping here sometimes. I could always use help if someone likes the plant part of it, because I don't know the plants from the weeds. And there's times I let things grow that I think turned out to be a weed, but they had pretty flowers, so we left it. And there's times I pulled out stuff and then realized, oh, wait, I think that was a good plant. Anyone ever do that? It's tricky. It's tricky. Somebody get that? But, God is patient. We might not be able to tell the weed from the plants, but God does. And we have to trust that ultimately, even though the wicked seem to prosper, ultimately there will be this just judgment by God. We live in hard times. It can be hard to live holy, but ultimately your sacrifices to live the life that God calls us to live will be rewarded, even if it's not in this world. It's interesting because, we biked through the winter, and I often tell you about biking and stuff because it's something I do and it makes me think about spiritual stuff, because you think you're going to die sometimes when you're biking, not just the cars. It's like your lungs are about to explode sometimes. Gertie and I took a little ride Wednesday night and he thought he was going to die. And I actually thought he did because he disappeared. I was going to get the car to get him. No, but, I biked in the winter, and it was hard. It was horrible. Remember? Like, Bob biked with me. It was terrible. Steve, it was terrible, right? Like, you're like, oh, my gosh, it's horrible. But the end result is, when spring comes, you're in better shape. And so, sometimes it's hard, but it'll make life easier. Lifting. Lifting is hard. I mean, it's fun, too, those of us who like to pick things up and put things down. And it does get you often involved in moving other people's furniture, which is like the downside to being able to pick things up and put things down. Some of you just like the putting down part. Some of us like the picking up. But, it's hard, but it makes you stronger. And life sometimes is hard. It's hard when it doesn't seem like there's judgment, but ultimately God will judge correctly. And God doesn't relish in the judgment part. God gives us a way out. Now, let's say you went to the doctor. Has anyone ever been to a doctor? Just seeing if you're listening. No, some of you are shaking no. No. But if you go to a doctor, let's say you go to a doctor, and he says, or she, because it can be either. Doctor says to you, hey, you're sick. And you need to take this medicine and you'll be better. Now, if you go home and you don't take the medicine, you're a man. No. Sorry. Men, we're a little stubborn at times. Anyone? All the men are even raising their hand, and all the women are just like, yes, gosh. Men, can't live with them. But, if the doctor offers you a pill to fix and you don't take the pill, it's your own fault, right? And ultimately, Jesus is the pill. He is the medicine. It's putting our faith and trust in him, we can escape judgment. But without Jesus, there's judgment. It's natural. But God's intervened. He's done all he can. He wants all to come to know him. He's patient now. Because sometimes we're impatient about judgment, right? Like anyone ever I'm ready for it now? But are you glad God didn't do it 5 years ago? 10 years ago? 15, 20? Because we're all glad God waited long enough for us to get in. I was picturing it like, you ever see like those World War II movies and there's like submarines and, it gets like torpedoed or something on the ship and they have to like close those doors with a little hatch. I always feel bad for the people stuck in there, right? Now, if you were like running to the door and they were closing it, wouldn't you want them to wait like a second or two more to let you in? Hopefully you'd also be concerned about the people behind you, but at some point the door does close. And God's given us the way out, and He's giving us a time because He wants us all to come to know Him. Ultimately, there will be judgment, and when we love others, we point them to Jesus. But when we put our faith in Him and choose to live for Him, the eternal benefits we get there are beyond compare.